All right, here we are. So we're back with Victor today. I think one that I'd be very interested talking to is this guy that I've noticed on Twitter since very early on, because he's like pretty much all of the other semi-credible open source intelligence folks refer to him. And he goes as Constantine, both on Twitter and on Blue Sky. And he's been running these kind of NAFO, private fundraisers the entire time. And what's cool about it is I do think they're legit. In fact, I recently made my first donation just because I felt bad for never having engaged in this at all, even though I go through charities a lot. But they do things like actually go, okay, well, these guys need logistics vehicles. Like, yes, there's military equipment, but they also need just plain trucks, right? The actual people moving stuff around, they need excavators, like just for digging trenches. There's like a relatively big network of these kind of private channels that have been crowdsourcing funds similar to I don't know, GoFundMe, that kind of thing. And using PayPal campaigns to get this kind of under the radar stuff that in private the military commanders know they need, but that are in short supply and don't look sexy on a list of ammunition package from the U.S. to be delivered to Ukraine. And yeah, so it would be really cool. I would really love to have somebody like that on for a conversation, to just talk about how they got into it, how they make sure that they know where the money is spent, right? They'll who are they talking to? It's usually people who seem to have family who are from Ukraine, have family connections there.
This individual coordinates charity for Ukraine. That's what you're getting.
Kind of. These are semi-charity, right? It's not.
They're not tax deductible kind of things, but they are. You're right. There is a whole apparatus around that's not just ammunition. These people live there. They need care packages, and they're they're living in a really shitty situation, and the charity around the edges helps a lot. And it's not even just fighting. It's just so there's a lot of relocation aid for people that have moved to other countries. There's just support for people, who have family members who are on the front lines.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a wounded veteran, assistance kind of thing on it. Definitely a lot of help is needed there. Obviously from the government end, but privately too.
I think the reason why this crowdsourcing stuff is relevant is because they often just know specifically people that they're friends with, or that they know through family who know that they have the ability to fundraise these things, and they know that those specific people right now need a truck, right? They just got one of their trucks destroyed. One of the trucks broke down. They ran out of spare parts. So there's this top-down level of coordination only goes so far. And I even back in the earlier time in the war, I don't know how it is now. I assume it's still the same thing, but around the time of the Kherson and Kharkiv counteroffensives, where they were actually successful, there was some legitimate newspaper articles where people were embedded with these units, and they were like, well, actually, a large part of what's making these units successful is that they're just swapping confiscated Russian equipment amongst themselves as needed, right? So they are simply in touch with each other of the different units and going, hey, I have a bunch of tanks, but I have more tanks than I need. Can you get me some rifles? I'll give you 3 tanks. They had this kind of bartering economy going amongst themselves. And I think that some of these private fundraisers are just kind of another extension of that, where the same people that are also swapping military equipment with each other as needed are kind of reaching out and going, hey, can anybody get us 3 extra pickup trucks? Or an excavator here because like our last one broke down. Oh, we really need to be digging these trenches right now. That kind of stuff, right? And I think that maybe it's just it happened that way because in a way they're more effective than the top-down like distribution, whatever infrastructure that's set up to try to do this. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was just thinking about like front lines. It's very difficult for me to imagine what like the situation on the front lines is like. Is there around the clock gunfire? Is it like a sporadic thing like that maybe you could go 4 days semi-normal and then all of a sudden there's like a 5 hour just chaos. That kind of thing was.
I'm actually going to write that one down. I think that's a great question. Yeah, what is it actually like? Because that's a great question. Because this guy Jake has a channel as well. It's much more popular than ours. Has a military reporter coming on in like a week, and they're looking for questions to ask. And I think that's a very good one, right? I mean, I was asking some other things because the guy's also recently been in Syria and kind of had more detail on the weird like Syrian rebel offensive. But I think it's a really good question because it doesn't often get answered. Like we often hear about the frontline situation in terms of, oh, I went to this unit and morale there sucked and they were bitter and and stuff like that. Like there's not a lot of description of like, okay, look, here's how often you get shot at. Here's how often, bombs are dropping around you. Here's how often you see drones in the sky. What usually happens is that somebody gets driven somewhere into like close to the dead zone in between the armies. And at some point there's a drone in the sky and they leave. They just hightail it out of there. If they can't find a way to bring it down immediately, right? And that's all you really get from the reporter because it's not about gunfires or artillery shells dropping all the time, at least not a lot of the time. It's just, okay, there's a drone. The next thing that's going to happen is either there's going to be artillery around here or there's going to be a gliding bomb around here, or there's going to be a drone with explosives around here. So we go hide.
Yeah, right. But around, so, if you look at, I don't know, like Saving Private Ryan or something, they would have you believe that day and night nonstop, people just don't sleep and they're shooting all the time. But you're like, realistically, like, what is it? What do people eat? How do they get food in and out? What's the bathroom situation like? All.
You're right. How miserable is life for an actual like frontline soldier right now? In every, what does that experience actually entail?
There was a podcast, I think it was on NPR, where somebody was talking about their experience on the Russian front line, and it sort of seemed like they had a few miles behind the front lines, like base, and then every day they send people to like the actual front lines where they get shot. Speaking of, whenever I look at the news, and this always like is hard for me to comprehend. Whenever I see, we'll just say like Western news about this, it really sounds like things are going horribly for Russia. Like, did you see this thing about people using donkeys now? So yeah. What I don't understand is how are they still winning?
Like, so this is actually exactly what I was going to try to do a narrative about, a monologue. And for anybody who watches this recording, I will point out that I didn't do that just because it was really challenging to actually summarize all of that, because I see it as actually kind of complicated, because I think that actually the incentive to just look unbeatable is very strong for the Russians. Like, the Russians' best chance is to just be seen as terrifying enough that people get out of their way. And it's a very simple one. It's very one-sided. Like, Russia has no incentive to like sort of play their cards, not show their hand unless their hand sucks. Because they want people to feel like they're not worth challenging. Whereas Ukraine is in a situation where on the one hand, it feels nice to look strong or maybe to be able to demotivate Russians. But at the same time, if they look like they're just flat out kicking their asses, there's a high chance that foreign aid would decrease, right? And they can't really risk, I think, foreign aid decreasing unless they're really very sure that with whatever they have right now, they could just mop up Russia, right? And just like establish a border where they see it fit and make sure that Russia never moves again. And until that point comes, their incentive is basically to find a way to keep bleeding Russia if they can, while sort of sending mixed signals about, to at least make sure that people understand that it's still very much worth your time to help them have more ammunition, more equipment, etc. And so I've always seen the incentives as kind of mixed, where like if you look at it, I mean, right now it's turned really weird, right? Because you have right now you have like Russian battalions on crutches being sent back into the fight to, I don't know, just die, I guess. And you have a situation with donkeys. So I think that I was looking at it over time, like before, and the signals that I thought before were like, okay, like what are the kind of like negative signals around the Russian side, what are the positive signals around the Russian side that seem to like sort of like jump out above the immediate narrative, right? And what I saw was that like when Ukraine doesn't want to look too strong, they're in control of where they allow Western reporters to go, right? So if a Western reporter comes and wants to see how things are and wants to bring a story back for, I don't know, New York Times or Forbes does a lot of these, then they have to ask the military for protection. They have to ask the military, for some kind of detail, and then they get driven to somewhere on the front where something is there that effectively probably Ukraine wants the world to know about, right? That would be my assumption, and then eventually they would leave, right? So in a way, Ukrainian military, if they're clever, have a lot of control over this picture of what these reporters see and then write about, right? And on the other hand, we also don't have any visibility really into what a Russian reporter would see. We have no idea if there's any real or realistic war reporting that we can get any access to whatsoever from the Russian side. And so all we see is like some high-level signals around, well, okay, the Russians are gaining ground, but it's also clearly the best strategy for Ukraine if it wants to maximize Russian losses to keep them moving forward, because that's the only way they come out of their hidey holes, and find a way to give them ground very slowly. And if you look at the amount of area that Ukraine has yielded to Russia over the course of the last year plus, it's incredibly small, like relative to the entire map of Ukraine. Like it would still take them like, I think, I'm going to make up a number here because I don't remember the exact one. I think it's on the order of 10 years or something like that, just to get the rest of the Donbas region. That is like the 4 territories that Putin had officially declared liberated from Ukraine, like in the beginning of his war speech. Not to mention like the rest of Ukraine, which would be like another, I don't know, 100 years or something. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy slow. It looks like when you look at the daily updates, it's a bit depressing. It's like, oh, the Russians took this town and they took this thing and they advanced here. But then you look at the map and it's like, it's one ditch. Like it's literally, they got from one side of a small field to the other side of a small field. And they lost like 3 vehicles, another 3 vehicles, and another 20 men, doing that. And when they got to the other side, there was nothing there. Like one thing I've seen in some of the Russian like war, there's a guy that does like these translations. It's called a war translated things, like he goes by Dmitry, but I don't know if it's his real name. And so he's been specializing in translating intercepted Russian calls, whether they be cell phone calls between soldiers and their relatives back home that somebody for some reason recorded or they got intercepted, or whether they be radio communications or whether anything like this, like whatever you can get out of it. And of course, probably a bit one-sided because they're trying to demoralize the Russians, but it's always like, yeah, like there was one where the Russians were just like, this is creepy, right? I mean, we lose tons of people moving forward because we lose people the second we come out of a ditch. But when we get to the other one, there's nothing there. Like we'll spend like a day trying to get to the other one. We'll lose a bunch of stuff doing it. And then we get there at the end of the day and then there's nothing there. Because the people actually like shooting at them we don't know how far away they really are.
So a couple of things. Um, you kind of mentioned at the beginning that the news, the information we get on either side is uh, not the full story. So, like, what do you think is accurately known? Because now you were talking about gaining land. Like,
Yeah.
is that maybe I assume that's something that you think is correctly known? Maybe
Pretty
there's like
accurately
so
known.
like what is known and what's not known,
So,
and
so I
is
think
this a
that
situation where the thing about the donkeys was maybe that's where they led the Western reporters to look at the one
that would be
donkey?
the Russians leading the Westerners. So it doesn't make much sense, right? Like this is just somebody uploading a clip onto Telegram, some Russian soldiers. Now there is multiple clips. So there's like clearly multiple clips of multiple donkeys that have surfaced. Could this be bullshit? Possibly. But it in let's go. So two things, right? One is like, what's the truth about losing ground? For that one, I'm pretty confident because there's this like open source intelligence like sort of network on social media, and there are people, including like one Andrew Perpetua. I can put the link in the description later, but he's like done nothing except, and I don't know how, by the way. I hope I don't know how he's gone completely batshit insane probably by now, but he's done nothing except watch videos of people dying, since February 2022. Whatever gets posted on Telegram, the drones for one thing, right? The drones always have cameras, and a fair amount of the drone footage, of the drones destroying stuff or of the drones smothering, ends up on social media. I don't really know why, to be honest. I'm sure not all of it does, right? Because that would be kind of crazy. Again, this could be kind of selective leaking, or it could be
Right.
completely uncontrolled leaking of the Ukrainian military's activity. But it's probably something like selective leaking. It's possible to locate, for people who have watched hundreds of these clips a day, they basically literally recognize the fields and they recognize the city parts, and they see how they change day by day, and they can see, okay, well, this part of this city is more destroyed, and I saw some Russian vehicles in it in this piece of drone footage. They weren't there like last week. Last week they were still on the other side of that field, right? So there's literally people updating maps, and there's been a network of people updating maps based on that kind of information for the last 2 years, and they seem to be pretty accurate, and they generally agree with each other. And I think like you can go to Deep State Map, and see a relatively play by play of what they think changed. Those are usually done with a few days delay. So that the assumption is, of course, that the military won't publish the footage immediately, or they won't allow it to be leaked immediately because it's pretty sensitive and it would give away also where they're hiding. And so they probably leak it with a few days lag, and then it gets analyzed over the course of like a few days lag and then gets posted. So it might be like a few days to a week out of date or something like that. By the time you find out about something, I would hope. But it seems reasonably accurate. The narrative, at least, has been very consistent when you look across those aggregates.
Yeah, is it like one of these situations where every people, the media on both sides is feeding their people bullshit, and then one day we'll wake up and either hear that, like with Syria, one day we'll wake up and we'll find out that Russians are gone, or we'll find out that Zelensky gave away half of Ukraine in some deal. And it'll just come out of nowhere because this whole time we're not being fed properly.
Yes, I think the short answer is it kind of could be like that. And so this is why I sort of tried to sort of aggregate in my mind like what the signals are that could go one way or the other if that happens, right? Because I think that it could go like that. I think that now
The news is inaccurate.
huh?
Which kind of news is inaccurate?
Well, I think if I have there's a, for example, if I have a YouTube channel called Reporting from Ukraine, and they do a video every day about how badly Russia is losing the war right the fuck now, right? And it's always like it's purely inspirational stuff, basically, right? Like it's purely inspirational stuff. It's not really news. And then um, you know there's a few others like that come to mind that I would probably not name by name because I don't want to piss anybody off. Because some people would also say, okay, that's still good for morale or whatever, right? Like it's not necessarily meant to be taken literally, but you do have to filter some of that stuff out for sure. But then, like, if I look at it, so there were some reports of at least in 2023, of course, this was also while the US was being slow approving their ammunition package, right? After when Trump was starting to try to block the next, I don't know, 40, 50 billion for Ukraine. And then there were more reports coming out of Ukraine about high losses and low morale on the front lines and how desperate they were for more ammo. But then most recently, the most recent statement I saw from Sirski is that they now have an artillery disadvantage of 2-1, which is by far the best they've ever had. Like normally, all the reporting has been pretty consistent that the Russians have between like 5 and 10 times as much ammunition and are firing 5 to 10 times as many artillery rounds a day as the Ukrainians. And now they're down to 2-1. And we know that there was already a big resupply of artillery munition for Russia from North Korea because they seem to be running out of what they could produce themselves like a year ago, right? And then you know, they were resupplied by North Korea, and then eventually they got troops from North Korea to try to help take Kursk back, and they haven't been able to take Kursk back. So those are signals to me that Russia is not doing well, right? And on the other hand, like the fact that, you know, Ukraine is just kind of hanging out in Kursk, but isn't really making progress either. You know, those could be a sign of weakness. Now, one thing that I see as a very good sign of strength from Ukraine, a very strong signal through this whole noise of media and daily updates and stuff, is the fact that Ukraine isn't drafting people under 25, right? And they still aren't drafting people under 25. They've drafted, obviously, they have a lot of, they've done a lot of mandatory drafts. It's a country at war, right? It's like if you're fighting age and the military is low on manpower, you can get drafted. But they've not agreed, even though the US was trying to pressure them to, they've not agreed to draft anybody under the age of 25. So anybody between the age of 18 and 25 can come voluntarily and serve if they want to, but they're not being drafted. And in the meantime, like, you know, Russia has dropped all of those kinds of restrictions already a long time ago. They've started asking private Russians to please donate their private cars to the military in exchange for, you know, maybe some kind of payment. I don't really know. And now they're using donkeys, evidently, you know, as they somewhat. They're sending soldiers back into battle on crutches, right? I mean, it's a pretty different picture if you compare it that way. I don't know for sure that Ukraine isn't doing some of those things, right? Like maybe it turns out a donkey has a way to get somewhere with a cart of artillery shells that, I don't know, a Jeep has trouble with or something. I don't know, right? Like it could be that they actually found some kind of use case that's meaningful. Yeah, it could also be that it's because Ukraine evidently has managed to destroy roughly up to half of Russia's oil refining capacity over the course of the last few months. And so it could really be that there are just genuine fuel supply problems. And those fuel supply problems could actually affect both the fact that you try to bring in pack animals, you know, to help out with the fact that you can't keep vehicles running reliably, and that maybe you patch up soldiers and send them walking forward because you have no way to actually get them out to like a real hospital. I mean, that would be a really cool, silly thing to do, but maybe they're even related somehow. I don't really know. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a very, very, I think it's a very tough situation at best for the Russians. Like those signals are not looking good for Russia to me, right?
Yeah.
The fact that Ukraine is drafting under 25, that they're developing their first cruise missiles, they're developing new drones, they've developed new land-based drones, so they don't need as many infantry soldiers, and they've started showing footage of them taking back Russian trenches entirely with land-based drones combined with air-based drones. So like the picture you see there is like, you know, again, not necessarily entirely reliable. It's a picture of like one army's tech level deteriorating to the Stone Age and the other army's tech level actually increasing, and, you know, them working frantically to substitute their human ranks with robots. So it, you know, like that's probably a highly optimistic perspective, but it would be pretty fascinating if that's how this rolls.
Yeah, I need to wrap up. Gotta go to another meeting. But like, so in summary, it sounds like the indicators that are reliable would be like the draft age on either end as a sort of sign of desperation.
Yeah.
The
Syria falling.
that the line is moving. There seems to be like consensus on that. I don't know. Was there one other?
I think we have drones draft age. I was going to say that the fact that Russia can't support its allies like Syria struck me as a fairly strong signal.
Oh, right. Yeah. So the fact that Syria or that Assad collapsed is a sign that they're not able to like spread their influence. Or they're stretched thin. Right.
Yeah. That's what that seems pretty accurate, right? Yeah.
Sounds
cool.
good.
Awesome.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for going through it with me. Bye.
Yep.